I believe that it is so important to follow your passion, and if you do, it will become a profession. I'm not sure I fully understood this, although I'd always liked various jobs I'd held, until I developed and launched this podcast. I am driven to learn about the many organizations I interview, and I value and love to share that learning with others. It isn't for any other reason than I feel passionate about the social impact work others are doing, and this is my contribution, or maybe even my calling. But what if we are called to be a spiritual leader? What if we have the gut feeling and want to follow that desire or drive that comes from something we often cannot fully articulate? We just know. How do we start? Where do we go? Our featured organization has answered that question by building a community of support for those who have been called to start a church based on the Christian faith. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, a podcast featuring interviews with nonprofit and social impact organizations under $10 million. My name is Laura Witkoff, and I'm excited and proud to be your host. My hope is that you love the stories as much as we do, and perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, invest in, or donate. Feel free to pass along any valuable information you hear today to others, and remember to send me the name of any organization you'd like featured at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com. A quick note about the organization I selected for this interview. Our podcast series is faith and politically neutral, and I intentionally selected this organization because although based in faith, their purpose is serving those in leadership, just as coaching and organization development services might be understood more typically to be in support of the business community. Cyclical Los Angeles, as the pilot program which gave way to Cyclical Incorporated, the foundation, now the underpinning to support these efforts outside of Los Angeles, is a Christian-based organization whose mission is to identify and support discerning church starters and existing churches as they join the mission of God through the natural and historical life cycle of starting new churches. This growing collective of leaders is an ecumenical community of innovators that share a common culture and set of practices created to thoughtfully start new churches across Los Angeles and now beyond. Cyclical Los Angeles has 12 core values that drive their offerings for discerners, starters, and established churches to support sustainability. They provide a range of resources and support that, which also includes therapy and coaching. What I love about this organization is that the premise is that everyone can use guidance, community support in their professional development, even if their professional development is God's work. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today, Nick Warnes, founder and director of Cyclical Los Angeles, and founder and executive director of Cyclical Incorporated. So let's get started. Welcome, Nick. Please share your passion about the cyclical environment, Los Angeles and beyond, and your deep connection and commitment to what led you to your involvement.
Well, Laura, thanks for including me. I really appreciate this and look forward to this conversation. That's a big question to start with, but I guess we can start with, the work of any innovator, I suppose, or the work of any entrepreneur is oftentimes filled with a bunch of loneliness. And I think, primarily what we offer in light of, all the fancy things, all the fancy frames and all the fancy words is mutuality for people who are really taking huge risks and who are putting their lives and potentially their families' lives in really vulnerable situations. And loneliness and vulnerability and risk can be a difficult place to work. So that's kind of where we step in, and we support and we encourage and just feel really honored to be able to support people who are putting their lives in such a vulnerable state.
I think that's such a good point. Let's spend a little time on vulnerability because I think it's so true. You have a gut feeling, particularly because this is based in the Christian faith and starting something. You believe it's the right thing to do. You're called to do it. And yet it's hard to find people around you because it can be, as you said, very isolating.
Well, first of all, let's be honest, starting churches isn't exactly the most quote unquote normal thing that people talk about in culture. Okay. So I think it's vulnerable, and that a lot of people don't understand, what the heck we're talking about and what the heck we're doing. And then if there are preconceived notions on what's happening, oftentimes those preconceived notions are misguided. Certainly there's the vocational vulnerability. Oftentimes they're leaving quote unquote successful jobs. We often joke that the only thing that's as risky as starting a new church financially is starting a new restaurant. For those of you that know the quote unquote chances of success of creating a sustainable restaurant, similar ratios for starting new churches.
It's interesting that your experiences that people have left successful, monetarily successful, and are looking for something more, is my guess. They've been called to do something. They're looking for something that's more soulful and something that will fill them.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that thought. Certainly some of them are younger and just getting started in their careers. There's like hundreds of leaders now. So it's not fair to like bucket them all into one bucket. So they are very diverse in multiple ways. But yeah, there's some younger leaders that are taking a risk early on. And then there's, people that are 70 years old and they feel a sense of call to do this new thing and to get to support, both ends of that spectrum is pretty unique.
Must be really interesting in the community aspect to have folks who've had a full career in something else and folks who are just starting out, and how to sort of match people or connect them in a community engagement opportunity to really do some shared learning, because there's learning on both sides of that equation.
To mash up diverse crowds creates all sorts of, I think, meaningful connections for people that they don't normally get. The 22-year-old hipster and the 72-year-old woman who had a successful psychology career. They don't get together very often in multiple spheres of life. So all of a sudden they're together. And certainly we do all sorts of training, coaching, and therapy and whatever, all that stuff. And I know people appreciate that, but really when it comes down to it, it's the magic that happens when unlikely people are together, learning from one another when they're both in lonely and vulnerable states.
Yeah, so true. And then they can build off of ideas from one another, and they feel then supported to take that next step, whatever that next step is. So walk us through. Imagine that I am someone who is in that vulnerable state, and I come to you and I say, I want to join your community. I want to start a church. And I'm not sure how to even go about it. I have a sense of what I can offer, but I'm not sure anybody will want to receive it.
A lot of Christian denominations can't receive people very well. And oftentimes these larger denominations have significant blind spots with regard to who can and should be doing this work, because they have like a pretty industrial mindset on how this is supposed to happen. So a lot of our work has been widening that. So just, I guess, to keep it simple, for my brain anyway, to think about it linearly might be helpful. I went to Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. Actually moved here from Grand Rapids, Michigan. My wife and I pulled in our U-Haul truck, and we saved for a year to come out here. We saved up $1,600, spent every penny on gas and on that U-Haul, got here and said, all right, let's see what happens. But foundationally, I think what we found day one is that we found LA to be home. We knew this was our spot. I remember when we were unloading our truck. And it was dinner time, and we were walking by different windows in our apartment complex, and everyone was cooking dinner. And there was dinner from our neighbors who had just moved from India. There's dinner being cooked from people who had just moved from Brazil. There's dinner from people who had just moved from Texas. And so all these smells are in the air. We're going by, and my wife and I are like, oh my gosh, we're home. We're coming from fairly homogeneous Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so right away we knew, this was our spot. So seminary is lovely, whatever. I learned all the Greek things and had to learn Hebrew and did all the...
Impressive. I didn't know that. Great.
Yeah, did all the things. And after seminary, we started this church, and out of that church, we started like 15 other churches in the first 5 years. So at that time, I was asked to create a network out of those 15 churches. And what we learned right away was, first of all, primarily for myself, I knew that I didn't know what I was doing. But what I did know to do was to gather the leaders and to provide the best food and the best drink and the best training. And what started happening is we're doing these trainings, but people who wanted to start new initiatives started coming to these meetings. And we thought, cool, this is great. You gain these competencies at these meetings, enjoy this mutuality. But that whole season of when you're thinking about starting something, that felt really unique and special to me. And I really wanted to set that apart. So that's when we started another group for discerners. And that's kind of where this term cyclical, that you'll probably hear a lot in this podcast, this is where the cycle comes from. We think about how discerning church starters sometimes become church starters. And then sometimes that turns into churches, which ought to be identifying the next generation of discerning church starters. So it's kind of the three parts of the cycle. And those are the three groups that we work with closely.
It creates a sustainability model.
Yeah, that little flywheel thing that I think probably many of the listeners know, it does, it generates a flywheel that churns a leadership pipeline, which is needed for the work that we do.
It's interesting because being in the nonprofit world myself, I often find that boards don't necessarily create that pipeline.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, leadership pipelines, whether, for-profit, nonprofit kind of work, creating leadership pipelines outside of, traditional headhunting kind of structures. I think if you're going to do something more meaningful, a lot of the work is in working with potential leaders early on. You can save yourself a lot of heartache and trouble as you do that work.
It's true. And you get the buy-in commitment and you get their input early on.
Throw in a couple appetizers and a nice bottle of wine, and it's amazing what happens.
Right. It's amazing. How do you capture the brain trust that comes out of those community informal conversations? Because there's so much great information, right?
So we have monthly gatherings for each of those groups. And one of my favorite things that we do this section called mutual consulting. So, I mean, I'm totally biased, but I think we work with some of the best leaders in Los Angeles. We'll get people into groups of 3, and you have to set a timer, and each person gets 1 minute to share a problem that they have. And then there's 3 minutes allotted after they share their problem for feedback, basically consulting, where they get feedback. And those mutual consulting circles have been powerful tools for people to encourage each other.
It's interesting because it's a similar model I use in my teaching at USC in my classrooms, even online. I put 2 teams together. They present a piece of what they're working on to get feedback. It's exactly the same because I believe editing and feedback helps you grow and come up and organize an idea in a new way. So I'm new. I'm in the discerning group. It must feel, and I'm imagining, it has to feel supportive, safe, welcoming, because I'm vulnerable, right? I think I have something to offer. I'm not sure, but you're creating a culture of safety. And I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we create good spaces. We create spaces where humans can flourish. And that includes certainly getting away from any sort of fixed mindset that people will have, and really brings about an openness to adaptability and adaptive leadership. And what, in our tradition, we would say the Spirit of God might be guiding people toward, as that Spirit is discerned in community. When it comes down to it, it's the group of people together that experience mutuality and then end up becoming friends and having lunches together, or having coffee, or their families come together in the long run, become friends and neighbors. That stuff makes it all worthwhile.
Talk a little bit more about your offerings. Now that you've established this pilot program in LA that's been super successful, you're really branching out with the development or the creation of this foundation that then can offer this, I imagine, nationally and maybe globally.
We could think about it in 3 phases, I suppose. Phase 1 would be the pilot program in Los Angeles. We launched Cyclical LA, I think 6 years ago now, and have been fortunate to work with literally hundreds of leaders from around the city. But what happened was my coaches and mentors said, hey, you need to be ready. Other denominations are going to want similar frameworks for their settings. So I quickly formed a nonprofit called Cyclical Incorporated. And so Cyclical Incorporated started 4 years ago now. And that thing jumped very quickly, as well as we partnered with a whole bunch of different denominations to create ecosystems in their cities where they found themselves. So yeah, all across America, Canada, Europe, and now jumping into some work in Africa.
It's really beautiful because in some way it started with your own vulnerability, didn't it?
Yeah, certainly.
And so the empathy that is drawn from that, relating to your own experience, allows you to share your learning and your model with others.
Yeah, I mean, when we started, so I'm a Presbyterian pastor, Presbyterian Church USA, PCUSA, and the PCUSA is not good at many things. The first of which, 10 years ago, certainly, was starting new churches. So I was kind of the forerunner on this. I was out front trying to pioneer this stuff, and I didn't have any of the systems we have. So I wish I was more empathetic. My wife is so into Brene Brown right now, and I hear so much about
her.
empathy all the time, right?
And vulnerability and shame, and we could have a long conversation about that. So once somebody joins the community, they stay with it, and that I imagine when issues come up, like I have a sermon this week and I'm blank, I need some support or guidance or help. Is that part of the community aspect? Is it part of the ongoing sustainability aspect?
Anyone who joins our community, they typically do enter as a discerning starter. Sometimes people discern that they don't want to start a new initiative. And if they discern that, we say, amen.
Yeah, that's okay.
Lucky you. Good on you. But then if they do discern yes, then they do move into a starter category. Yeah, the multi-tiered relationship networks, I think, are really important, right? So anyone who joins our group has access to me. And we joke, I have a director of spiritual formation. Her name is Bethany McKinney Fox. She is just an incredible gift to our community. And so the joke is if you want to talk like strategy or next moves, anything like that, then talk to me. If you need to be reminded that you're loved, and that you're cared for, and that your life is important, all those kind of things, then you go talk to Bethany.
You are a remarkable team, because think about that. That is a real complementary partnership, because you need both.
Oh, certainly. You get Bethany, you get me, and then you get access to therapists, you get access to spiritual directors, you get access to mentors, you get access to coaches. And then again, I know I've said it already, but you get access to the mutuality that happens, the mutuality of collegiality. It's
just beautiful to note that how I grew up understanding clergy in my religion was they were a step closer to God than I could ever be, even though in the Jewish religion you have direct access. It's a little bit different than other religions. And yet they were, more learned, knew more. And so there was a little bit of a separation. And I never imagined, of course, they need support too. If I were a very seasoned pastor, could I still join the community feeling a little stuck and feeling like I've been doing it for so long, I want to regroup and be reconnected?
There's a large misnomer of preconceived notions for who starts new churches. And oftentimes people do imagine younger humans that do that work. Part of my job nationally and internationally is to widen the plausibility structure for who can do this work. So certainly seasoned pastors have so much to offer this community. And oftentimes also these pastors were never offered a space to be able to do this kind of work, which has been kind of the foundation of their heart for a long time. And when we pop up these ecosystems in different cities, it's amazing who shows up. Here's a really fun podcast term. I work with middle judicatories and upper judicatories around the world.
Oh, great.
So it's like a middle governing body. Yeah. It's like a middle governing body of a denomination. Great. So like a collection of, let's just say 30 to 100 churches, they make up a middle governing body and they all work together. And that's typically who we partner with, or a national denomination. Right. So it's like a whole country. Right. And so they'll oftentimes be worried, like, if we start this, like, we're going to invest some capital in this. Is anyone going to show up? Because they're not sure. All 17 ecosystems, except for one, I won't name that one. But 16 out of 17, just creating the space really attracts people who have just been longing for such an enterprise for a really long time.
So part of what I'm hearing is you're educating folks like these other ecosystems when you're partnering with the potential there about what this really is. And my guess is, and I have no idea, and it will be unnamed, the one that wasn't successful really didn't deeply understand educationally what this was truly about and what it could offer. And so, I mean, you're nodding. I don't know if that's accurate, and correct me.
Yeah, they were bringing in like fancy speakers to like hold conferences.
Yeah.
No. The ethos of this thing is in mutuality and friendship and collegiality, not in the fancy speaker who you pay a lot of money to come and say the right verbs.
One of the things for our listeners that might be really important that we talked about but didn't really deeply define is the terminology discerners, starters, which you did go to and we can imagine. But will you go back to that and define it for our listeners?
Again, we're trying to broaden who can do this work. Too many people imagine a person, typically a man, standing up on stage giving a sermon. And that's like what church is. To me, that's not what church is at all. Right. And so certainly there are people who can give lovely sermons and can attract folks to listen to their sermons. And that is a fine gift. But oftentimes that preconceived notion hinders people from actually wanting to do the work of starting churches in a broader sense. It's like Angela Duckworth from Grit. Did you ever do Grit?
My son gave me the book. I love it. Yeah.
It's the genius syndrome,
Yes,
right?
yes.
You think you need to be like this, like what you're talking about with clergy, you need to be this set apart person to do this work. And we're saying, no. You don't need to be an Enneagram 3 or 7. You don't need to be a Myers-Briggs ENFP to do this work.
Right.
This work is for anyone who might feel the nudge to do this kind of work. And a lot of our churches don't look like, go to a building on a Sunday and sing some songs, clap your hands. It looks quite different. So if we're going to broaden those imagination plausibility structures, then we need to create space for people to dip their toes in this water before they jump in.
So discerning is really the actual word of, am I discerning? Can I discern? Is this something I want to continue to do? And I get to test it out before I completely jump in. Yeah. But I love what you said about differentiating between our image of what church is and what you believe church is. And I'd love to hear what do you believe church is?
Oh, that's a big question. Holy cow. I want to hear what you think church is, Laura. I think of my systematics professor, Vela-Matti Karkkainen, who would speak in a deep Finnish accent, and he would ask in class, what makes the church church? And it's a great question. It's a question people have been asking for a long time. What makes the church church? Certainly, there are 2,000, 3,000, 6,000 years worth of books and reflections from people. If that's your style and you want to get into that, you can read a million perspectives. I feel ill-equipped to answer that question. I would say things like, in my tradition, the church certainly includes 3 things. It includes some sense of community, of the people of the church. It includes some sense of commission, of being with and loving and caring for and being loved by and being cared for by neighbors. And then it includes some sense of, we would maybe call it communion. We can do it the 3 Co's, where it would be some sense of intentional gathered worship. I've always been and am growing in a commitment to decentralize all leadership structures. Now we have staff all over the world that all contribute. And I'm a 40-year-old privileged white man living in Los Angeles, right? That provides a real limited understanding of reality. Mashing up all the different perspectives is, hard work, and it's tricky at times. But oh boy, overall, it provides a much more beautiful milieu of context and texture that I think we've been able to lean on has been quite productive.
I love that, because it really speaks to your own curiosity, and it also speaks to your own acknowledgement of what you don't know until you discover it through others.
So for those listeners who aren't familiar with church planting, a lot of people call it starting new churches. Historically, certainly in the last 50 years, it's been a pretty traditionally conservative mechanism that's filled with proselytization and colonial tendencies. So I think we have been fortunate to be on the front edge of something I would argue is a bit more thoughtful. We really prioritize post-colonialism and how do we do this better? We really prioritize inclusivity. And just not a lot of church starting networks prioritize those things. So I feel grateful to be around a community that has valued those things and encourages us to continue to embody those. As tricky as it can be, and as much kickback as I get for it, it is well worth it.
I wasn't going to necessarily go there, but you brought it up. How do you manage, without going into details that you don't feel like you want to, how do you manage the kickback?
The problem comes for me personally when I don't get the chance to talk it out with somebody. Someone will write something about us in an article or a book, or someone will say something about us in a podcast. And, 90% of the time, the preconceived notion is just not true. So I will take the time, and I'll sit down for coffee with anyone just to talk it through. And if you disagree, we just disagree, and hopefully we can all be mature adults. And the frustrating part for me is when there's misunderstanding and then there's a lack of ability to actually discuss it, to figure it out together.
What's great about what you shared is you and I are an example of that. I could have thought, okay, this is total church based? Because we want to be, right? We want to not have that as a flavor of our nonprofit podcasting. And yet I wanted to reach out and hear your perspective. And then being able to talk to you before we decided to go forward with the interview, it was clear to me what you were offering was something well beyond what my maybe preconceived notion might have been.
Yeah, I appreciate you including me. And this won't be a secret because it's going to be on a public podcast, but don't tell anyone, but I feel much more comfortable in this circle than I do oftentimes in Christian circles.
So you just read my mind. So I'm Jewish. We've been talking about that a little bit. And I'm thinking, gosh, if Nick runs a church, I think I'm going to have to start attending. Okay. Because I've never met anyone like him before. So what's next for the foundation? I know the Cyclical LA was a pilot program, successful. You've gone beyond that. What's next on the horizon?
Yeah, let's do the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 thing, right? So phase 1 was Cyclical LA. Phase 2 was, okay, we started this nonprofit and now we have ecosystems in Canada, the United States, Europe, going into Africa. And then phase 3 is a big shift we made. So we have like the traditional mission statement, mission, purpose, vision, values, that thing. And our mission statement for the nonprofit Cyclical Incorporated was to create and sustain ecosystems for starting new churches. I certainly find that statement to be accurate. And I also find it to be maybe the least inspiring sentence in the history of humanity. So we want something with a little more funk behind it, and also something that got us just out of starting new churches and more toward broader innovative processes and faith communities. We took like 6 months with our board and we shifted to a new why statement. So we utilized Simon Sinek's why, how, what.
Yeah, I love him.
So our new why statement is God's love for the world, inspiring faithful innovation through the church. So we're centering in on faithful innovation. So how are we going to do faithful innovation?
Right.
Well, certainly we're going to create ecosystems for starting new churches. But we've also started a new how off of our why statement around faithful innovation called cyclical content. So we're going to do faithful innovation through publishing content. So we started a publishing house. We're going to do faithful innovation through cyclical social enterprise. So we're going to be working with existing business leaders who are going to be working with budding entrepreneurs in mentorship and in fiscal support. And we're going to be starting this thing called Cyclical Full Circle, which is working with existing churches for the purposes of creating cultures of experimentation in those churches for partnering with their neighbors.
It's fabulous because each of those arenas connects with sustainability and the idea that you've incorporated innovation as one of your core words in every single cyclical innovation, every area is significant. It stands out to me.
We're just rolling them out. So cyclical content is up and running. I have a new book coming out. I was going to shop it around to the publishing houses, and the director of cyclical content said, nope, you're going to do it with cyclical content.
Absolutely.
So I'm doing my new book with them. The other ones are coming out in the next 2 or 3 months, and we'll see. Like, I feel a bit nervous about it. This is kind of, the worry is, what's the metaphor? Like with radio stations. Like radio stations typically have a certain kind of genre of music, and we're really broadening our genre here. So by doing that, are we going to create a bunch of noise that complicates the whole thing or not? And so this is why it's important to have a board that's willing to say, yeah, we're going to experiment with this. We're going to try it, and we'll see if it works. And if it works, we'll scale it up. And if it doesn't work, we will finish what we need to finish, move right along.
Yeah, I said before, cyclical innovation, it's really faithful innovation. I want to dedicate this podcast to faithful innovation because I think that encapsulates so much of your value system and your belief system and what allowed you to be vulnerable in the space and try something. And I think you have to be a little bit nervous, but you've got this community behind you. And the other thing that you said that I think is so telling and so important is the piece about diversity is when you create faithful innovation, there's something there that meets somebody's need within the community. And I think that's remarkable because it doesn't always happen. You have to fit yourself into it versus I fit because I belong. Small and Gutsy is sponsored by the Intrinsic Group, my boutique management consulting firm specializing in guiding organizations to leverage talent, optimize processes, and to ensure the organization's narrative is aligned with their culture. We'd love to invite you to be a sponsor. So if you're interested in sponsoring Small and Gutsy to keep it going, please reach out to me at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com. So, Nick, with all of my guests, as you know, if you've heard any of the podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
I always ask a quick round of gutsy questions.
Can't wait.
Can't wait. Here we go. So the first one is, what is at the top of your wish list? However, the answer cannot be money or funding.
That as we go through and out of COVID, that the church would create a better normal for itself. The normal before COVID was not good enough.
Yeah.
So we have a great opportunity to be actually more humble, more just, more merciful, more kind, more good. And I hope that we will be doing that as we go through and out of COVID.
Do you see a hybrid component to what you're doing that will further embrace communities that cannot be always in person? How do you see that continuing post-COVID?
Yeah, there'll be churches that return to only kind of parish-driven models.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our churches have had lots of folks from all over the world join them because of the virtual. So most of them will have to go to a hybrid kind of a thing. So whenever they do anything as a church, they'll have to include some sort of Zoom aspect or whatever medium they're going to use, as well as in person. And then a lot of the churches we've been starting through COVID have been only online.
If you were to think of a song that describes Cyclical Incorporated or Cyclical Los Angeles, what would it be?
How about Ben Harper, Power of the Gospel?
It's great.
Ben Harper gets me every time. I used to drive to Vegas to go see my dad when I was in seminary. He would be there on business, and I would drive through the desert listening to Ben Harper, just like weeping tears, ready to go see my dad. Yeah.
One of my favorite that has gone around the internet, I have to share mine now that you're talking about sort of ones that have a religious or a spiritual connection, is Hallelujah, that I've seen.
Yeah, Leonard Cohen.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's just I've seen it on Zoom with different, I've had it, I just I melt every time I hear that.
My number one lyric in a song is from that song. Did you read the book? There's a book about that song and about Leonard Cohen. But the lyric from that song that is my number one lyric of any song ever, love is not a victory march. It's a cold and a broken hallelujah. I mean, come on now, right? Holy cow.
That's
Love that lyric.
incredible. What makes your organization gutsy?
If there ever was a Titanic to try and move in a new direction, it may be the church.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I feel like, are we just rearranging what's the line, rearranging the tables on the Titanic or whatever?
The furniture, yeah.
The furniture on the Titanic.
Yeah.
We're potentially generating the next Reformation with this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of us that are talking about how the church needs a serious Reformation, and it happens every 500 years. So who knows, maybe this is the next one.
This is your time. That's how I look at it. This is your time. But you know what? It does make you incredibly gutsy. And I think the folks who've benefited from your organization and what you have to offer is really a gift, because in order to provide a gift, I think you have to be gutsy and bold. What is something that outsiders or maybe even some insiders don't know about Cyclical Incorporated or Cyclical Los Angeles?
I would say that we have a tremendously gifted staff that can all too often be taken for granted. They're people who could be giving their lives to anything. We're all overworked and underpaid.
Yeah.
We all could be doing other things. But for whatever reason, we've chosen to give our minutes to this. And maybe a shout out to the staff there would be appropriate.
Yeah. We'll dedicate this to not only faithful innovation, right, but really to the staff that's making that faithful innovation possible. If you could get one celebrity, might be unfair, one celebrity or influencer to endorse or talk about Cyclical Incorporated or Cyclical Los Angeles, who would it be?
Oh, this is no brainer. Dr. Dre has been a perfect example to me of someone who's kind of working quietly on the underground, unearthing so many people and giving them the voice that they have in the broader culture.
Yeah.
So I love that for Cyclical, that we're just kind of quietly working under here and giving people platforms to be who they are.
Any last comments before we close out? This has been such an incredible pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, just I feel, as we head into spring here, I'm looking at my fig tree. It's sprouting leaves right now. I know we're coming out of a really long and dark winter. And I think of springing in Michigan, where I'm from, and how I know people are ready for hope that's coming. I know that we really want to be a part of that hope, certainly moving through and out of COVID, but also a part of hope for a more just and humble and merciful culture. So yeah, I mean, whatever way that we can be a part of that, we are in. We can't wait to jump into it further and to be supportive.
Beautifully said. We are coming out of a really dark time, and hopefully we'll have all learned and found those silver linings or found ways forward to create a more equitable, nurturing, connected world.
Preach it, Dr. Laura. I'm here for it.
I love it. Nick, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for including me. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, give us some stars and write a review on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts, or buy us a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/small and gutsy. Social Impact Supporter says, thanks to all these amazing organizations for making Small and Gutsy so worth listening to. The questions are great and the response is poignant. Keep it going. Thanks, Social Impact Supporter. We will do our best. I want to thank my partners in this endeavor, my co-producer, sound engineer, and composer, the amazing Pavel Franson, my exceptionally talented graphic designer, Nate Addy, my social work intern extraordinaire, Stephanie Tran. Please check out their bios on the Intrinsic website, and all the folks, friends, and family who have guided and inspired me. Our blog of these small and gutsy nonprofits and social impact organizations can be found in the organizational stories section of the Intrinsic Group website, so that we can continue to link clients, volunteers, future employees, investors, and donors to this small but mighty network. Of course, we can't take responsibility outside of our own vetting of the organizations we interview, so before you sign on to support or work for them, we encourage you to do your own due diligence and research them as well. We just want you to learn about the small and gutsy nonprofit and social impact organizational sector so they can spread their story and their impactful work. From small and gutsy to big with impact, I'm Laura Witkoff, and thanks for listening.